You can start now, sir. We are live.
Good afternoon, everyone. I, Nutan Prakash Sharma, Medical Advisor, High Glance Laboratories. It's my pleasure to welcome you all for today's webinar, Taming of the Dragons. There are two topics which we are going to discuss today. First topic is diabetes technology in 2020. Second topic is prevention of diseases in diabetes. Let me take honor to introduce our esteemed panelist, Medical Advisor, High Glance Laboratory. The chairperson for today's session is Professor A.S. Zargar, former chairman, Department of Endocrinology, SKIMS, Srinagar, past president of Endocrine Society of India. The speakers for today's webinar is, our first speaker is Dr. Suhas Irande, a leading diabetologist from Pune. He will talk about diabetes technology in 2020, which is the need for today's time. Our second speaker is Dr. Pankaj Manoria, an interventional cardiologist from Bhopal. He will talk about the prevention of cardiovascular diseases in diabetes, taming of the dragon. There will be question and answer round at the end of the webinar. Now, I would like to hand over the session to Professor Zargar. Over to you, sir.
A very good afternoon to my elite faculty, Dr. Suhas and Dr. Pankaj, and also to the delegates who are currently listening to us and members of the High Glance team. Today we have two very senior professionals who are talking about on issues that are contemporary. Dr. Suhas Gopal Irande is from Pune, a very senior diabetologist, a friend for decades, who is going to talk on diabetes technology in 2020. When we started endocrine practice in this country, I still remember, I was just talking to Suhas and Pankaj. When first time during my DM, somebody got a glucometer. We poo-pooed it. How can you get a blood sugar in a minute or so? And I was recently, during one of the international meetings, a guest for an organization of United States, which has introduced a 5G-based cloud technique that a person does a blood sugar, and the moment it is fed through his mobile phone to the cloud of that agency, where an algorithm decides what needs to be done. In fact, Suhas, last year I was amazed. I was giving a talk somewhere, one young diabetologist came, basically a pediatric endocrinologist, who has quite few type 1 diabetics on follow-up. So he had himself developed a software on his iPhone. He said they do a blood sugar before they go to bed. It would be on my mobile, it would turn red if it's a chance of hypoglycemia and hyperglycemia. And if it is in the normal range, it will be green or blue. He said, I expect a telephone call from all of them who is showing that red. If it does not come till 11 o'clock, then I call them. That you have a problem, we need to take care of. I'm talking of this place. I'm not talking about Western world. This is here. The fellow had himself, the doctor himself now sort of devised it. And that is where the technology is taking us. And every time some of those technology guys would visit me in my office or in my center now, half the time I don't understand what they are talking about. So I get a technical staff at least make me understand. So it's very timely that we need to understand the role of technology in managing diabetes and managing non-communicable diseases. In fact, I was working on a document for Government of India for 5 years, Vision 2035, where I was supposed to look at how to improve the connect between urban and rural health, where I have given a huge document with all references and authentication that how we can create a virtual world and treat non-communicable diseases in distant India. And I submitted that about 3-4 years back. So I hope and pray that someday it sees the light of the day. Now over to Dr. Suhas for his talk.
Thank you so much, sir. A very good afternoon, all of my friends who are listening. I will be talking obviously on technology in diabetes as it stands in 2020. So let me define what is diabetes technology, and this is from ADA 2020 text. The hardware, software, and the devices which people with diabetes use chiefly to manage their blood glucoses, but also their lifestyles, is generally called as diabetes technology. Traditionally or historically, this is divided into two parts dealing with either insulin administration, that is insulin syringes, pens, or insulin pumps, and the glucose monitoring, which is glucometers or continuous glucose monitoring devices. Technology is expanding very fast, and a thing called as hybrid closed loop insulin pump with a software support is on in practice, and many smart gadgets for looking and measuring physical activity, exercise, even the eating patterns of the patients, and even behavior monitoring also are going to come. There are a lot of caveats which we should primarily appreciate before starting the discussion. Technology can certainly improve life of people with diabetes, but they require intense training to understand the technology and to implement it on a continued basis. They require intense education and a surveillance or follow-up. Rapid expansion and complexity of technology could be a facilitator. However, it is a challenge and it could be a barrier for some of our patients. Reimbursements can lag behind the speed of developing technologies, and cost of the new gadgets can certainly be another barrier implementing of them in practice. With large amount of data being collected by these monitors, the data security, cyber security also is an important issue. Let us start with the discussion on glucometers. Zargar sir has already mentioned about glucometer story way back in the early 80s. So glucometers not only these days record and store the glucose readings in their memories, but they assist the patient stay in target range. Glucometers now help the patient change their behavior, diet, exercise pattern, and medication doses. Glucometers allow the patients to review their progress and work in tandem with their physicians and the diabetes team consistently to achieve glycemic targets. This is one recent trial called as ASCEND study. Herein, patients with diabetes use a new glucometer with blood sugar mentor and a dynamic color range indicator called as a ASCEND study. Just look at how the glucometer facilitated the patients. This is propensity to take specific actions by the patients based on the meter displays. You can see that in the people with diabetes who were using insulin, their actions, for example, adjusting insulin dose, considering change in their patterns of snacks, consider exercise to tackle the highs, talk to the diabetes nurse or their diabetes specialist about the high sugars, adjusting timing of the insulin injections. So all these were facilitated because of the ASCEND glucometer. Similarly, actions these patients would take for low glucoses, that is hypoglycemia, after reviewing the meter information. They were helped in testing their sugars more, especially at these times of the day when the lows are more likely. They tried to react a bit sooner to feeling low by taking a small snack. So they tried to avoid hypoglycemia earlier. They thought about their experiences, routines, or food intakes, and the situations which precipitated that hypo. So they were certainly helped to take actions in the right way by using this new glucometer. How does this glucometer train the patient? So these are some examples. These are the different figures. Of course, these are in millimoles. And you can see that at the bottom of the meter screen are some color indicators like blue, green, or maybe pink. The blue is all right, green is within range, and the pink is something which is high. So these are very clearly seen by the patients, not only numerically, but by the color indicator also. This is another example of the same. So glucometer doesn't only check the sugar, but it actually tries to warn the patient by taking him to some kind of a action by mentioning that the sugar is high, unusually high, or maybe even suggesting the patterns which are found in that high or low blood sugars. What does the, you can say, end users, the stakeholders in the technology think about? What do the patients need? They need education. They need a good understanding of diabetes, how medicines and tools work. They need to really work regularly, tweaking of the routines and dosing, reminders for medicine refills, laboratories and appointments, and motivation to keep all up. Getting real, what the patients want, a sense of well-being and normalcy, the sense of feeling in control, no hassles and ease of operating all these things, and recognition of how darn hard this is. That is empathy by the other members of the diabetes team. Why technology is important? Technology keeps or helps keep records not only of food, but of activity, of blood glucose levels. Real-time monitoring, which is a trend these days, or real-time monitoring of different bodily functions via sensors or wearable gadgets. Reminders to take medicines, test glucose, and schedule the labs also. And give an idea about what is happening, the trends, and that can be indicated by arrows, which we will discuss down the line. What do the physicians need? They need a feedback loop. So an efficient method to pull up the right patient data when and where needed, sufficient time and compensation to spend on the data analysis, and easy and clear method to communicate back to the patient what is to be done next. My friends, you appreciate that diabetes sucks. There is no doubt about it. It's a lifelong disorder. And most of the time the patient feels, and really he could be on his own. And a 15 minutes consult with you may not really suffice for him till the next follow. So a continued touch with you through these technologies is something which is really helpful. These are some of the definitions. Broadly, most of them are very well known to us, but two words are important. Integrative is something which is more than one gadget if they are on board. Then there is some assembly or a program which integrates the data from all these machineries, and it helps take some meaningful decision. That is very important to understand. And then there are different guidelines for type 1 diabetes juniors, the pediatric ones and the adults one, type 2 diabetes on OADs or maybe without insulin therapies and on insulin therapies, pregnancy diabetes, etc. There are some quality controls also. These are the popular Parkes error grids on the glucometers. And what is actually seen here? The y-axis is the measurement of the blood glucose, which is done by the meter, and on the x-axis is the actual glucose which is there. Now, when they are plotted against each other, you can see that if the actual glucose is, let's say, 150 to 200, and if the record measured glucose on that meter is also hovering in the same range, then you see that the dots actually hover in the A area, okay, A area or maximum B area. If they are recorded low or high, then they wander into that C or D or even E zone. And that is something where the glucometer's quality needs to be really repaired. So these are the Parkes error grids, and the glucometer's qualities are plotted on that. Similarly, the continuous glucose monitors also are plotted on the same Parkes error grids. There are other measures of accuracy for the blood glucose meters and CGMs, like arithmetic deviations, absolute deviations, absolute relative deviations. MARD is something which time and again will come in discussion, and you will read it also a lot of times. Mean absolute relative deviation, and generally it should be less than 10 for most of our continuous glucose monitoring devices. CGM in critically ill patients. Generally, CGM is not really something which is strongly recommended in the intensive cares. However, there are at least some electronic glucose management systems which are commonly used in ICU, For example, the algorithm reported time to target, that is glucomander or glucose stabilizer, glucocare, endo tool, etc. And once the patient is put on these systems, then the patient's glucose is usually expected to come in the target zone in either 4.8 hours or 6.9 hours, or with endo tool 2.3 hours. And then reported hypoglycemic rates naturally come actually on a very low side. So this is very good for the critically ill patients. These are the continuous glucose monitoring systems available in the intensive care units like Glucose Scout, OptiScanner, GlucoClear, etc. Coming to the CGM devices, which we are using in our day-to-day practices, the physicians, then we have different definitions. One, of course, is the real time, which provides automated alerts at specific and or changing glucose levels. Then there are popular ambulatory glucose profiles, the Abbott machinery, which is called as an intermittently scanned CGM, which displays the glucose values when the patient's sensor is scanned by the scanner. Another is blinded CGM, typically the Medtronic's iPro gadget. It displays the glucose values in clinic only when because the processor or the reader is owned by the clinic. And there is an unblinded CGM, which displays the glucose values to the patient, because patient can actually, that gadget can transmit that data to the patient's cell phone also. These are the types of CGM systems. For example, the professional CGM and a personal CGM. Professional is something which we own and we see the data, we download the data. Personal is something where the patient can download the data and he can transmit that data to the doctor. There are different factors, like for example, patient's own issues, preferences in individualizing the CGM device selection. The patient, of course, needs a good insurance coverage for that particular monitoring. Patient certainly will be helped if the CGM system gives alarms of highs or lows. The data, if it is shareable with the consultant, it is always going to be more handy. Receiver functionality, calibrations, predictive alerts, whether the glucose monitoring, continuous glucose monitoring system is compatible with the insulin pump, with the mobile device of the patient, sensor visibility are some of the issues which the patients actually are going to decide or prefer for going into a CGM system. This is a pictorial presentation of some of the continuous glucose monitors which we use, and they are available broadly in our country. Medtronics gives us iPro 2. The Dexcom people give us Dexcom G4. Some places they can also provide G5 or G6 Pro, which is supposed to be the latest. G7 also is coming down the line. And then the most popular and the most affordable is by Abbott, the Freestyle Libre Pro. So these are the gadgets which are available. The first two do the interstitial sugar. You know very well that CGM looks at interstitial sugar, not the venous or capillary sugar. They give us the reading every 5 minutes, and the Freestyle Libre Pro monitors every 15 minutes of the interstitial sugar. This is just a comparison of the professional CGM systems. iPro 2, of course, is blinded. You can download the data only at the end of 3, 5, or maybe 6 days. Dexcom is both blinded as well as unblinded. Freestyle is blinded. The wear for iPro 2 is 6 days. Dexcom G6 is 10, and Freestyle Libre Pro is 14, etc. Now, these are the current options for personal CGM systems. The last one is the Eversense, which lasts for 90 days, 180 days, and the new one which is in the offing will be 360 days. So it's a prolonged monitoring, so to say. Dexcom G6 is something which is quality control wise, it is supposed to be the best, because the MARD, the quality control indices of that is around 7.5. With Connect Guardian, which we also are using, it is hovering around something like 8.3. With the Freestyle Libre, or the intermittently scannable ambulatory glucose profile machine, the MARD is somewhere around 11. So these are the quality controls. This is a comparison of the personal CGM systems. All of them necessarily have to be, you can say, compatible with an iPhone or advanced Android phone, so the patient and the consultant can see the glucose graphs on their respective cell phones. Some devices like iPro, you need to actually enter the capillary blood sugar at least 2 or 3 times in a day. But with the Dexcom 6 or maybe the Freestyle Libre, you may not really enter the capillary readings. The calibration is not required. The sensor is factory calibrated. There are some indicators of glucose. For example, there is an arrow which is called as a trend arrow. If it is showing going up vertical, then that means that the glucose is rising rapidly, more than 1.8 milligram per deciliter per minute. And adjustment of the total bolus dose or the calculated bolus plus correction, you need to really increase by 20%. If it is a angular arrow, 45-degree angle, then glucose is rising at a rate of around 1.08 to 1.8 milligrams per deciliter per minute, and you increase the dose of insulin by 10%. If it is a horizontal arrow, no need to change the rate of insulin or insulin dose. If it is glucose falling or glucose falling rapidly, you have to naturally reduce the dose of insulin addition. This is just a recent publication of the clinical use of 180-day implantable glucose sensor by Eversense. You can see that in all of the patient groups, the first column, you can see here, the HbA1c came down from baseline 7.4 to 6.9. People who were CGM naive, who were on pump, but they were not using CGM continuously, they showed more drop in HbA1c, 0.7. But people who were simply doing, let's say, multi-dose insulin and who had never used CGM, they also showed a good 0.5% drop in HbA1c. Similarly, the glycemic variability, the standard deviation and coefficient of variation also improved with the use of 180 days of Eversense implantable continuous glucose monitor. Coming to the pumps, these are some models available in India: Medtronic's 530G, 630G, and even 670G. With the increasing number, the value addition is being done for every new model. Even 780 also is right now in the offing. So this is the advanced model of Medtronic's Minimed 670G. In the center, you can see that it's an insulin pump. Very obviously, it has, you can see it is compatible with Guardian Sensor 3 or Guardian Link 3 transmitter. This is a inserter or inserter which inserts, of course, the sensor into the subcutaneous tissue, and it works in tandem with the Minimed 670 pump. And you have an additional gadget called as Contour Next Link 2.4 meter, and all this is supported by what is called as a CareLink Pro software. So this pump is automatically going to adjust the patient's basal rate of insulin, and it is adjusted every 5 minutes depending on the glucose readings which are relayed to it by the sensor, and it helps keep the patient's sugars in the target range for fewer lower sugars and fewer high sugars. So day and night, the highs and lows are better controlled by it. Not only that, look at this, the suspend below low. So the insulin infusion by the pump automatically stops up to 30 minutes prior to reaching the patient's preset low limit. You know very well that every patient may not get a symptom of hypo below 70. Some of them may get it at even a level of 100. So this pump automatically suspends insulin infusion by the hint of that hypoglycemia. Automated insulin deliveries are some which are generally recommended for children 7 years or older and adults, of course, to improve their blood glucose, consisting of 3 components as I shown you: insulin pump, continuous glucose monitor, and the algorithm which determines the insulin delivery, the software. In these systems, insulin delivery can be suspended, increased, or decreased automatically. Currently, a hybrid closed loop, another terminology, HCL, is approved, which calculates the basal rate, but requires the patient to bolus for the meals as well as snacks. In future, we are looking at a truly automated closed loop system where the patient will not be required to do anything. This is the ZDRF thought process and developments of different automated insulin deliveries from the stage 1, where it was very low glucose insulin off pump. So hypoglycemia, the insulin pump will automatically go off, protect against hypoglycemia. hypoglycemia minimizer, hypoglycemia and hyperglycemia minimizer, automated basal, which we just discussed, then fully automated insulin closed loop, and then fully automated multi-hormone closed loop where even the glucagon pump will come on board. So this is the pictorial presentation of how these systems work. This is a sensor which is inserted in the abdominal skin. It works in tandem with the insulin pump. The pump actually is kept in the pocket of the patient, and this is the controller. Sometimes the controller could be, you can say, something which is the patient's own cell phone also. What are the controller programs themselves?
Us,
Different
couple of
types.
more minutes, so us.
Yes, sir. Model predictive, proportional integrative derivative, fuzzy logic, and some more. Now, are all these, they are assessed on the cost front, and the National Institute of Health Research, they generally say that the advanced models, the automated deliveries are certainly better for the patient's quality of life, less hypos, less hypers, more time in range. However, if the patient uses only an insulin pump, no value addition, along with an intermittent CGM, still the patients could save the cost and the quality of life can be certainly maintained. These are some experiments and publications where the DIBO system had proved that yes, mobile app software and the consultant owning the controller program, they certainly improve the quality of life in people who are using basal bolus insulin. The Commissaire study is something which is more radical. This states that glycemic outcomes in adults with type 1 diabetes are impacted more by continuous glucose monitoring. That's all. The insulin delivery, whether the old one or the sophisticated one, that doesn't matter. And that's what actually has been shown here, that the A1C has improved better with a CGM continuous use rather than either MDI, multi-dose insulin, if the patient is taking versus an insulin pump. And these are some more publications in 2020. All are the type 1 adults. Diamond trial also had type 2 diabetes adults, and they have generally shown that yes, the A1C's time in ranges improve with newer and newer technologies. There are more technologies coming in way, mid-infrared skin spectroscopy, which is non-invasive glucose monitoring, newer insulin pens like NovoPen 6 or NovoPen Eco, which help the patient, the pen itself record the last dose of insulin, the timing of insulin, the total dose insulin taken over last maybe whatever number of days. And this NovoPen 6 improves the quality of life and the sugar control. The advanced 780G Medtronics pump is supposed to give you better time in range and better quality of life. Libre 2 is another, you can say, monitor, which is Bluetooth low energy type, and it is supposed to actually give you better quality of life. And then there are intraperitoneal insulin delivery systems, 360 days monitoring, diet monitorings where the sensors are mounted on the patient's jaw or on the patient's teeth, and even continuous psychological monitoring also is being done on an experimental thing. Cost effectivity has already been tested, and the DKA, diabetic ketoacidosis, and hypos are certainly prevented by the newer technology use, and that saves billions of pounds and dollars in the terms of money for different patients. This is just a color example of a recent Guardian Connect monitor which we used for one of our patients, and this is the way the record comes. The last couple of slides to just show that in pediatric patients age less than 10, it is only the technology which can certainly improve the nocturnal glycemia. And you can see here that rather than the low glucose suspend pump, the upper one, which reduces the hypos by 38%, the predict low glucose suspend pump reduces hypo by 59%, and automated insulin delivery improves that by 100%. And for the same HbA1c, 6.7 in all three cases, the number of, you can say, hypos and the time spent in hypos is far less with the hybrid closed loop pump versus the continuous subcutaneous insulin infusion and CGM combined together versus the multi-dose insulin regimen. The last slide is the use of Dexcom 4G, wherein the patient of COVID and diabetes is isolated in a room and the monitor is kept at 6 meters, which is an allowed distance for that monitor. And the doctor can actually monitor the patient's sugar, as you can see in the graph, by, you can say, not even entering the patient's room. So technology can certainly help manage diabetic patients in COVID era. let us be aware that the devices and the inventions are certainly all right, but they should be certainly better acceptable and maybe implementable for the patients as well. Thank you so much for your patient listening.
Dr. Suhas, that was a very extensive talk on technology in diabetes management, expanding right from glucometers to continuous glucose monitoring systems. I still remember when I first time saw these continuous glucose monitoring systems during an international meeting. I said that is patient to be attached to or this is to be attached to patient. So sheer volume was so big. When I got the first continuous glucose monitor for SKIMS, costing $1 million then, we had to it would occupy a room.
Yeah.
So you can see now this miniaturization. But as you very aptly said, economy would continue to be an issue, but more importantly, educability. Educability of the medical professional that it is doable. And it is our job to see how to make it economically viable for our own people. Because such things are now available. Not only that, now the world has expanded into an area of artificial pancreas, where not only you manage with insulin, but also glucagon if something goes haywire with insulin and you get hypoglycemia. I'm sure that insulin pumps, particularly you had last talking about the type 1 diabetics, your last slide. Now in the Western world, insulin pumps have become norm. I'm saying they're standard care for type 1 diabetes. And their safety, which was an issue in their initial phases, has now by and large been taken care of. I'm sure there will be many questions which we will listen to later on. The second talk is by a very senior, elegant professional from Bhopal, Professor Pankaj Manoria, who is a very well-known intervention cardiologist. And he's going to talk about prevention of cardiovascular disease in diabetes, taming the dragon. I must tell you, we are a part of a global group known as Non-Communicable Diseases Collaboration Group. This group is getting monitored from Harvard Medical School and Imperial College London. We have been looking at the trends of non-communicable diseases over the last half a century. In 1975, if you look at obesity, part of a global group known as non-communicable disease, Indian men stood at position number 19. And in 2014, they stood at position number 5. It means obesity had grossly increased. Now, if you look at Indian women, their position had been at 19 globally in 1975. Now they were at position number 3, just after United States and China. Diabetes during this period increased from 11 million to 72 million. 72% of these diabetics do have some form of dyslipidemia. More than 2/3 of them have significant hypertension. That's why, you know, cardiovascular disease and diabetes is being so much talked about that in the last decade, it has been mandated that every time a drug for diabetes comes to the market, it has to first show its cardiovascular safety. And that's what we are going to listen today about how do we tame this dragon that is engulfing our patients in the long run. Dr. Pankaj, please.
Thank you. First of all, my sincere gratitude to the Highlands company for giving me this opportunity. I'll be speaking about, yes, as rightly mentioned, prevention of cardiovascular disease in diabetes, how to tame the dragon. Cardiovascular disease is no doubt a dragon in diabetes. But if you can tame this dragon, if you know how to. What I'll do I'll start with my real life case, and based on this real life case, I'll suggest how can we prevent cardiovascular complications in our diabetic patients, which is beyond the glucose control. This was a case of a 59-year-old diabetic lady. She was hypertensive, she was dyslipidemic, she was obese, means she has multiple cardiovascular risk factors, but she was very particular about her blood glucose control, and she was on a high dose glimepiride plus 1000 milligram metformin. But unfortunately, and she about few days back, she ended up with acute inferior MI. As you can see, an ST elevation in the inferior leads. She was taken for a primary PTCA, which showed a complete occlusion of the left circumflex artery. She did undergo a successful angioplasty to the left circumflex artery. She could be revived, and she was sent home in a very good condition. When we look into the her ABG, sorry, HbA1c, it was 6 milligram percentage. So you can say, so just the message I want to give through this short case was, mere control of glucose does not prevent cardiovascular complications. So good glycemic control is very good for microvascular complications like retinopathy, neuropathy, or to prevent infections. But glucose control may not prevent MI. You can die of a heart attack even with a HbA1c of 6.5, you can see. We all agree to the fact that cardiovascular complications in the present era are the main cause of mortality in diabetes. With 2/3 of our diabetes, they die of cardiovascular complications. Type 2 diabetes doubles the risk of cardiovascular disease compared with adults without diabetes. And we have seen from our experience and from the various trials that good control of glucose may not be sufficient to prevent cardiovascular complication, as was seen in the ACCORD, ADVANCE, and BADET trial. Good glucose control is necessary. It may prevent microvascular complications. It may prevent you from infection, but preventing myocardial infarction or preventing heart failure by good glucose control is not sufficient. So we need to go beyond the glucose control. So there's a sea change in our understanding and pathophysiology of diabetes. Previously, we used to have a glucocentric approach only, but now we apply a cardiocentric and a vascular-centric approach once we manage our patients with diabetes. The cardiology and diabetologists, they are no more an enemy, and we have joined hands together with this new term cardiodiabetology, and I'm sure with this joint hands and joint venture, we can manage our diabetes in a much better way and prevent cardiovascular complications in our diabetic patients. So if you want to tame the dragon of cardiovascular complication diabetes, you have to look into these 5 factors which can help you and in taming this dragon and preventing cardiovascular complications. And these 5 alive I've suggested can be a good glycemic control, as well as right selection of anti-diabetic drug, good BP control, good lipid control with use of statins, good anti-platelet strategy, and plus lifestyle. So if you have these 5 weapons, and you are using it in a correct way, you can control cardiovascular complications in your diabetic patients. So these are the 5 risk factors. If you have to control, you have to manage it very well. If you are able to deal with these 5 risk factors correctly, I'm sure you will be able to reduce the cardiovascular complication to a very great extent in your diabetic patients. So first of all, I will take about the glycemic control. Nowadays, we have various ages, 2 drugs available which have shown to reduce mortality in diabetes and which has been shown to reduce cardiovascular complications. These 2 drugs are SGLT2 inhibitors and GLP-1 analogs. Now, the recent ESC guidelines have clearly suggested that if you have atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, number 1, or if you have multiple risk factors for developing atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, then the first agent these patients should be on either an SGLT2 inhibitor or a GLP-1 analogs. So this is mandatory for all these patients, all these diabetic patients who have atherosclerotic disease or who have multiple cardiovascular risk factors for developing atherosclerotic disease. And this is a class 1A recommendation. SGLT2 inhibitors, either AMPA analogs, this is a class 1A recommendation for high-risk diabetic patients. Now, I'll also highlight a few newer studies, two more studies which have been discussed about 1 week back in the virtual European Society of Cardiology meeting, which was held about a week back only. The first trial was the Emperor Reduce trial. This was a trial done in patients with reduced ejection fraction. Almost 50% of these patients were diabetic, and what they found was, if you give empagliflozin to these diabetic patients with LV dysfunction, you reduce 25% chance of having a cardiovascular death or heart failure hospitalization. Also, you can reduce 50% chance of ending up in end-stage renal disease or requiring dialysis. So this new drug not only reduces cardiovascular complications, but also prevents your patients from landing up into end-stage renal disease. This was the first EMPEROR-reduced trial. Now, the second trial, which was discussed about a week back, was the DAPA-CKD study. In this study, they took patients with CKD with an eGFR of around 25 to 75 ml per minute, and one group they gave DAPA, and another group they gave placebo on top of optimum medical therapy. And what they found was that the primary endpoint of a decline in the GFR or renal cardiovascular death was 39% reduced if you give dapagliflozin in patients with CKD. You can look at the p-value of 0.000028. I've never seen such a significant p-value in any of the study. Also, if you look at the all-cause mortality, it was 31% reduction in the all-cause mortality and cardiovascular mortality and cardiovascular complications. So it is very clear that SGLT2 inhibitors are a panacea for diabetic patients, particularly if they have atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease or having multiple cardiovascular risk factors. Now, which of these SGLT2 inhibitors are best or better? It is difficult to suggest, as is it difficult to select from which of these superheroes the best. Now, the another drug which has been shown to reduce cardiovascular complication is the GLP-1 analogs. And these GLP analogs, by various mechanisms, by anti-inflammatory mechanisms, by preventing plaque stability, favorable lipid profile, anti-platelet, there are multiple mechanisms by which they reduce atherosclerosis and they stabilizes the plaque. And it has been clearly shown that GLP-1 analogs reduces myocardial infarction, reduces atherosclerosis, which in terms can reduce cardiovascular complications. And we all are aware of the LEADER trial, which has shown a significant 13% risk reduction in the primary endpoint of cardiovascular death, non-fatal MI, non-fatal stroke, plus a 22% reduction in the cardiovascular death and a 15% all-cause mortality. So clearly showing that GLP-1 analogs in patients with high cardiovascular risk in diabetic patients is a life-saving drug. Now, after this glycemic control, I'll come to the lipid management. And in lipid management, diabetes, the statins again is the second panacea for diabetes. And it has been clearly recommended by all the guidelines that all diabetic patients above the age of 40 years, they should be on statins. And we have number of studies to prove our point, especially this meta-analysis, which clearly shown that if you give statins to your diabetic patients, you reduce all-cause mortality, vascular mortality, plus cardiovascular complications are reduced. So statins is must for all diabetic patients, whether or not they are suffering from cardiovascular disease or not. All patients above the 40, they should be on statins, no doubt. But we all know that sometimes statins may not be sufficient. And still after giving statins, some residual risk remains. LDL sometimes is not, LDL targets may not be achieved by giving sometimes high dose of statins. That is what we call residual cardiovascular risk. So what to be done in these residual cardiovascular risk reduction? You have to add either ezetimibe in these patients, or the PCSK9 inhibitors are available. You can use these PCSK9 inhibitors, or you can use EPA. I'll come to them subsequently. We were all aware of the IMPROVE-IT trial, in which ezetimibe was used to further reduce the LDL in patients in which LDL was not controlled. I'll give you a sub-study of IMPROVE-IT study, the particularly diabetic patients. As you can see, when this ezetimibe was given, particularly in diabetic patients, there was an enormous benefit on top of statins once you give ezetimibe. As you can see, this graph is in diabetic patients. The red one is diabetic patients on without ezetimibe, and this is diabetic with ezetimibe. You can clearly see less complications once you start ezetimibe on top of statins in diabetic patients. But once there's no diabetes, the role of ezetimibe decreases. So very clear that ezetimibe has a role on top of statins, mainly in diabetic patients. Similarly, the PCSK9 inhibitors. If you have diabetes, then PCSK9 inhibitor benefit is enormous. As you can see on the left side, patients with diabetes, you can see the number needed to treat to produce one complication in diabetic patients with PCSK9 inhibitor was 37, whereas you need 62 patients to reduce one complications with PCSK9 inhibitor without diabetes. So if you have diabetes, then again PCSK9 inhibitors has a very tremendous role in reducing cardiovascular complications. Now, recent evidence has come up with this new omega-3 fatty acids, that is the EPA. that is the eicosapentaenoic pantoic acids. And a very recent trial in the REDUCE-IT trial, which was done in patients who have atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease or who are having diabetes with multiple risk factors. So this was a trial of almost 50% were diabetic. What they did was they gave this EPA, that is one of the omega-3 fatty acids, or another group, they gave the placebo. And what they found was once you give this drug and patient, this reduces cardiovascular death, non-fatal MI, non-fatal stroke, and plus unstable angina chances. And 50% of these patients were diabetic. And the cutoff value to give this drug was a triglyceride level of more than 150. So now we have, but it has been seen that in spite of having triglyceride more or less than 150, the benefit was seen. So the mechanism of benefit with this new EPA, that is omega-3 fatty acid, was much beyond the triglyceride control. Maybe this drug or this new molecule was having any anti-thrombotic effect or blood pressure lowering effect or anti-arrhythmic effect or anti-inflammatory effect. But one thing is clear, that this is a hot molecule and a very talked about molecule, and it has shown a very good result, particularly in diabetic patients with high triglyceride level. Yes, that is the EPA has a very good promising future, I can say this. Now, if you look, it comes to the recommendation by the Lipid Association of India in diabetic patients. They say if you have diabetes with no atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, the LDL goal should be less than 70. But if you have diabetes along with atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, then the goal should be less than 50. But it can be even reduced to less than 30 if you have diabetes plus MI history plus multiple cardiovascular risk factor. So 70 is the goal for diabetes without CAD. 50 is the goal for diabetic with CAD, and a very, very high risk, you can reduce the goal to less than 30. But yes, one thing is clear, statins is must for all diabetic patients above the age of 50. Now, the third weapon which we have by which we can control or tame the dragon is a good blood pressure control. Now, if you look at the targets for blood pressure control in diabetics, both the ESC and the AHA say the target of control for blood pressure for diabetes is 130/80 for all. You can reduce that to up to 120 to 130 systolic or 7 to 80 diastolic in high cardiovascular risk patients, but never go beyond less than 120 or less than 70. And also, RAS blockade should be the preferred antihypertensive agents. RAS blockade can be ACE inhibitors or ARBs. I will not go into the debate of AC versus ARB, but one thing is sure, RAS blockade should be the preferred agent for antihypertensive treatment in a diabetic patients. Now, another aspect of another weapon or which we can use to tame this dragon is antiplatelet therapy. So does it mean that aspirin should be given all diabetic patients like we give statins to all the diabetic patients? Answer is no. There was one trial, the ASCENT trial, which was done to assess the primary prevention role of statins of aspirin and diabetic patients. It was 16,000 patient study, one day group without evidence of cardiovascular disease, studied for primary prevention role of aspirin, and they gave aspirin versus placebo. And what they found was aspirin did reduce cardiovascular complications, the vascular complications, but the bleeding was very much. So it is not mandatory to give aspirin to all your patients of diabetes. You have to risk stratify these patients. If these patients are having a high risk of ischemic complications, then you can give aspirin, and but you have to keep the check on the bleeding endpoints. But yes, no aspirin for all diabetic patients. So 80 milligram of atorvastatin is safer than 81 milligram of aspirin in our diabetic patients. So all patients on statins, but not all on aspirin. Now, and one major study which has come in our diabetic patients, that is the THEMIS study. What they did was, in this study, they took patients of diabetes who were have stable heart disease without any history of MI or stroke. And in one group, they gave placebo, and other group, they gave ticagrelor in stable diabetic patients. And what they looked into, the primary endpoint of cardiovascular death, non-fatal MI, and stroke. And that was reduced significantly with ticagrelor in stable diabetic patients. But again, this should be taken with a pinch of salt that these patients again had a high risk of bleeding in ticagrelor arm. So yes, ticagrelor did reduce cardiovascular complications in these diabetic patients, but the bleeding was more. Then when they further analyzed these patients on the basis of whether these stable patients had undergone PCI in the past or not, and then they found that if the patient had a history of angioplasty done, then there's a role of ticagrelor for long-term management of stable patients. But if there's no history of PCI, then there may not be a risk-benefit ratio, may not tilt towards ticagrelor. So diabetic patients, stable patients, you can add ticagrelor if they have a history of PCI, which in long term had a net clinical benefit in terms of death, MI, stroke, or any fatal bleed. Finally, FDA has also approved ticagrelor for this indication in diabetic patients with stable CAD without history of MI and stroke. This has been approved by FDA for its use. Now, another molecule which has shown a very good result in diabetic patient is the rivaroxaban. In stable diabetic patients, I'm talking about, without any acute history. So in this stable diabetic patients with history of peripheral vascular disease, if you add rivaroxaban on top of aspirin in stable patients with diabetes and PVD, you reduce cardiovascular complication, you reduce peripheral vascular complications. So another drug, rivaroxaban in low dose 2.5 milligram daily, can be a very good agent in diabetic patients with peripheral vascular disease, as was seen in the COMPASS trial about a year back, which was discussed. So this is the last study in which was published in NEJM. What this study told us that they took around 271,000 patients with diabetes and equal number of placebo patients. This was a registry basically. And what they studied was, they said if you control 5 risk factors in diabetes very perfectly with a very good control, then the mortality in long term will be equal to the mortality in non-diabetic patients. So you can easily tame the dragon of cardiovascular complications if you control your risk factors, 5 risk factors perfectly, then the mortality in diabetic patients is equal to the mortality in non-diabetic patients. You can make your diabetic patients as at par with your non-diabetic individuals if you control the 5 risk factors which I've told you perfectly. This was discussed in this NEJM trial. So finally, the take-home message is, if you want to tame the dragon of cardiovascular disease in diabetic population, you have to control these 5 risk factors, proper selection of anti-diabetic agents, judicial use of SGLT2 inhibitors and GLP-1 analogs, a good BP control with preferably a RAS blockade, use of statins in all diabetic patients, or plus the new molecule EPA can be used, particularly if you have high triglycerides, aspirin judicially plus new antiplatelets, ticagrelor in selective cases, plus a lifestyle control and lifestyle management. So if you are able to control these risk factors, use this weapon correctly, you can tame this dragon and your cardiovascular complication will be reduced and your diabetic patients will live longer. Finally, I'll end off my talk with what our father of nation, Mr. Karamchand Gandhi said to us, that be the change that you want to see in the world. I say, be the doctor that the world want to see. Thank you. So practice evidence-based medicine and be the doctor that the world want to see. Thank you very much.
Dr. Pankaj, thank you so much. You extensively covered all the areas in cardiovascular disease and diabetes. But I think the most important lesson is that by just treating diabetes, you do not change the natural history of coronary artery disease. There was a paper published in Diabetologia in 1988. This was a paper on coronary artery disease in people who had pre-diabetes, who did not have diabetes. And that time, pre-diabetes meant impaired glucose tolerance. IFG was not yet defined. It was said that coronary artery disease increases 3 to 5-fold in people who have pre-diabetes. And in fact, Pankaj, most of these people with pre-diabetes will never develop diabetes, but all of them will have a 5-fold increase in coronary artery disease.
Yeah.
They published a subsequent paper. It was known as Paris Prospective Trial, Diabetologia 1992, which reinforced this concept. So what you said, that by changing HbA1c, the fellow dying in the grave was born in 1962. In 2017, with an HbA1c of 6, is not the humor part of it. Because even UKPD has shown that every time you drop a hemoglobin A1c by 1%, there is a tangible decrease in microvascular disease, microangiopathy. and there may be some decrease, but not commensurate disease in coronary artery.
Yeah.
That's why, people clung at statins when statins came to the market, because it was supposed to be decreasing the coronary artery events by 1/3. And then second thing came with hope and people clung to ACE. And then when a couple of papers came with ARBs. And now today, you very aptly summarized that now we are shifting to SGLT2 inhibitors if there are no contradictions. With this aim that even if hemoglobin A1C is correct, appropriate, but if you have an established coronary artery disease or you have many risk factors, somebody is a diabetic, dyslipidemic, hypertensive, smoker, family history of diabetes, you would take him at par with a person with an atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. So leader trial showed that GLP-1, you mentioned about GLP-1 receptor agonists, that has a potential of changing the natural history of the coronary artery disease. So many new things are happening. For the first time, being an endocrinologist for 4 decades, we never talked about heart failure. I have talked for M10 number of times on coronary artery disease for last 3 decades. But now see how our thought process changed in the last half a decade. Just because molecules became available which will change the natural history of this. And today we know 1/3 of total patients with recurrent heart failure are diabetics. Some of the resistant heart failure patients are diabetics. Not only what that first patient you showed with a good hemoglobin A1C, the coronary artery disease being coronary artery disease being occluded. And all of us know if you have recurrent heart failure, it has a much worse prognosis than many cancers today. So we have moved quite a bit. I'm happy that you referred to the guidelines of Lipid Association of India. I have been a part of these guidelines. We thought of it over a period of 3-4 years. Lesser the better, I was telling to an August national gathering yesterday only. Many times we end up in doing a good job by giving statins. LDL comes down to 50 and then the next doctor stops it. Ye bahut kam ho gaya. So that's why even in these softer areas, so it's not only in the technology we need to educate each other. See, I'm just telling you myself, we're just talking about heart failure for the last 5 years about diabetes. I would every time talk about risk factors and coronary artery disease in a diabetes. So we need to upgrade this understanding and translate the benefit of whatever new molecules come, whatever new research comes to our own patient population. I was happy you talked about that, Deepak, about this and
Reduce it.
from this place only, from Srinagar, working in the Harvard Medical School. Sanjay Kaul, who has done some legendary work in Los Angeles, from Srinagar Medical College. It means people are doing, if you have give a conducive atmosphere, people like Manoria and Suhas can do as good as anybody can do anywhere on this planet. I'm sure if there are any questions, we will be keen to ask our elegant speakers of the day.
Definitely, sir.
Any questions for the day?
Right, sir. We have a few questions asked by the viewers. So the first question we have is there any difference in reading of digital glucometer versus clinical test which doctors do in the clinic?
Two important things. Yeah. There are two important things. The capillary glucose, which we measure, by the very nature of the test, the readings keep on changing because the mix of the blood in the capillary keeps on changing depending on the person's situation, what is the ambient temperature. If it is you can say summer season, then it is an adequate mixture of both the arterial as well as the venous blood in the capillary because the peripheral circulation is dilated. Whereas in a cold atmosphere, the peripheral circulation is constricted, okay? And that is why the contribution from the venous side reduces. The more the contribution from the arterial side, naturally, the capillary sugar tends to be on a higher side. So this is something which is a basic kind of understanding which we need to have, and that's the reason why the glucometer readings keep on fluctuating. Other important thing is the normal ranges of the capillary readings are certainly, you can say, different, around 10% different from the venous readings. So Once this paradigm is understood, probably the difference in the readings should not create any confusion in the mind of a doctor. And the same we can always teach and explain to our patients. That's very important.
Okay.
On an
The
average,
next-
a difference of 8%. Yes, next question, please.
Yeah. When patients get CVA in diabetes, what investigations is required to assume CVA?
Dr. Manoria.
CVA, you have to do a CT scan to rule out whether it's ischemic or hemorrhagic first and foremost. And then you have to treat. The first investigation we all do is a CT scan, Ed. And further you can do an MRI to further, or MR angio to see for the vessels, which vessels involved. Yes, sir.
Is the speaker talking about the cerebrovascular disease or the cardiovascular disease?
He's asking about CVA, I think, cerebral vascular disease, I don't know,
Yes.
which is not relevant to this topic.
No.
Next question.
Next question, sir.
Yeah.
Does taking statins from initial phase of diabetes and for lifetime is safe?
Yes, we have enough data to suggest that statins is safe. There's a lot of myth that statins can cause some complications. It is not. It is. And there's a can cause muscle ache, myopathy. But long-term data suggests that statins is safe. The benefit which we get from statins is enormous and much beyond the little side effects which we can encounter in a very few patients. I can say yes, it is safe to give statins. And we have to give statins for lifelong, I'll say.
Pankaj, may I add a statement?
Yeah, sure.
The latest issue of American Heart Association, the Journal of American Heart Association, few articles which are very thought-provoking. And the important conclusion there is it is never too late to start statin for a person.
Yes.
That's very important.
Yes.
So even if you start statins maybe at an advanced age of the person, still it continues to show its benefits.
Yes.
I will-
To add to it, it is very important point which has been made. For aspirin for primary prevention, we say it is not useful if you add at a later age, means beyond 75. But for statins, there's no age limit. Even at any age you can
Yeah.
start. But this should not be with aspirin. Aspirin has no role in primary prevention in older age individuals. Yeah.
I will supplement it here. Many times people have a problem with some form of a muscle myalgia or myopathy. And, dose needs to be adjusted. You need to look at calcium metabolism. You need to look at vitamin D values and see that they are optimal and appropriate. And genuine myopathy because of the current statins would be very rare. But you must understand, today's guideline is, Dr. Pankaj was just now talking about it is much safer to take 80 milligrams of atorvastatin than 81 milligrams of aspirin. We just heard it 5 minutes back. In a similar fashion, if those 80 milligrams are not tolerated, check after some time if 40 could be tolerated. If they are not tolerated, check after some time if 20 are tolerated. If in a similar fashion you are giving 40 milligrams of rosuvastatin to somebody, check what is happening with 20 milligrams. Check what is happening with, and in fact, the current recommendations are that even if you have taken, let's say you have taken 80 milligrams of statins, 40 milligrams of rosuvastatin, and you have a genuine issue which will be in a minuscule population. Even if you have to give a statin on an alternate day, it is worth it because the benefits are so huge. First 18 months, a big dose of statins help in stabilizing the plaques. And then whatever you give has a mortality benefit. So whatever you give, so the benefits are so huge. People say that there is a higher prevalence of new onset diabetes and non-diabetics, and Alzheimer's disease or dementia. I was listening to a very beautiful talk, Pankaj, sometime back. One lady from Helsinki who is an editor-in-chief of diabetes medicine, she said if you look at data, because of statins, people live long enough so that their underlying tendency for diabetes comes to the fore. And people live long enough. If somebody dies at 65, he may have no dementia. But if with statins he dies at 95,
Mhm.
he's a bloody hell. He might have some form of a senile dementia or Alzheimer's. But see that he got 3 decades.
Exactly.
So I think we should not underrate the benefits that
Exactly.
statins do. But also, if there is an apprehension, the right doctor, the right professional should be communicated with, and the decision should be made accordingly. Yes, over to the organizer. Any questions?
As we are running short of time, I will request Rita ma'am to say a vote of thanks.
So with your due permission, can we close it?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So before we close, I would just like to take the honor of saying the vote of thanks on behalf of Highglance to all the attendees of today's webinar. It was such an honor to listen to all the brilliant speakers today. Special thanks to the international delegates for joining us from the different parts of the globe on a different time zone, and today's a weekend as well. And once again, our heartfelt thanks to the speakers, Dr. Manoria, Dr. Irande, and our chairperson, Dr. Zargar, for giving us an opportunity to be partners in spreading knowledge and learning today. And we will also take this opportunity to thank our domestic team and support staff conducting this wonderful webinar. It is a small beginning again, I would like to say, and hope to see you all soon with more interesting topics and knowledge sharing. Thanks a lot once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.